I met my husband at a neighbor's 4th of July party in the summer of 1988. I was 27 years old, working as a third-grade teacher at an elementary school in Denver, Colorado. I remember exactly what I was wearing, a white sundress with small blue flowers, because he told me later that was why he noticed me. He said I looked like someone who belonged in a garden. His name was Thomas. He was 31, broad-shouldered, with dark hair, and the kind of confidence that fills a room without effort. He was the son of Greek immigrants who had settled in Chicago in the 1960s and built a restaurant business from nothing. His parents were proud people. His mother especially. I would learn that later. I would learn so many things later. We dated for 2 years. He was charming, attentive, generous with compliments. He brought flowers to my apartment. He called when he said he would. He made me feel chosen, which is a dangerous thing to make someone feel, because once you feel chosen, you spend the rest of your time trying to stay worthy of it. We married in the spring of 1990. I was 29 years old. I want you to hold on to that number. I need you to hold on to it, because the timeline of my life matters in a way I didn't understand until much later. My mother-in-law flew in from Chicago for the wedding with my father-in-law, 3 of my husband's aunts, 2 uncles, and a collection of cousins I could not keep track of. They were loud and warm, and they hugged you the moment they met you, and they spoke to each other almost entirely in Greek. Not always, but often. Especially when they were excited or arguing or talking about something they didn't want outsiders to understand. I was an outsider. My husband translated occasionally. A joke here, a compliment there. My mother says your dress is beautiful. My uncle says you look like a movie star. I smiled and nodded and felt grateful for every crumb of translation he offered me. What I didn't know, standing at that altar at 29, was that I would spend the next 35 years of my life nodding and smiling in rooms where conversations moved around me like water around a stone. The early years were good in the way that early years often are before the weight of everything accumulates. We bought a house in a suburb outside Denver. I kept teaching. My husband worked in commercial real estate, which required travel several times a year to Chicago to visit his parents and meet with business partners. Sometimes I went with him. More often I didn't. There was always a reason. The timing was bad. School was in session. His mother wasn't feeling well and needed quiet. I accepted all of it. That is what I want you to understand most about me. I was not a passive woman by nature. I had opinions. I had a career I loved. I had a sense of humor and a group of friends who made me laugh until my sides hurt. But inside my marriage, I became someone who accepted. I don't know exactly when that happened. I think it happened slowly, the way water carves stone. You don't notice the erosion until you look closely and realize the shape has changed entirely. We tried for children in the first years. It didn't happen. The doctors ran tests and found nothing definitive, a term that sounds like good news, until you realize it means no one can fix what they can't find. My husband was disappointed in the way men of his generation often were, quietly and with a kind of withdrawal that felt like blame even when no words were spoken. His mother made comments sometimes, in Greek, and even though I didn't understand the words, I understood the tone. A tone can travel across any language barrier without any trouble at all. We eventually stopped trying. We didn't discuss it the way couples are supposed to discuss hard things. We simply stopped, and the silence around it became one of the first walls between us. By the time we had been married 10 years, the financial arrangements of our life had settled into a shape I had accepted without fully examining. My husband managed the money. This wasn't unusual for couples of our era and our background, or so I told myself. I had a joint checking account I used for groceries and household expenses. He funded it each month. I had no credit card in my own name. I had no savings account of my own. My teaching salary went into the joint account, and my husband said that was the most sensible arrangement, that he was better with numbers, that he was handling investments that would benefit us both someday. I believed him, not because I was foolish, but because I was busy and trusting, and because believing him required less energy than questioning him. What I gave up during those years without realizing it was not just financial independence. It was the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can take care of yourself. By the time I was in my 40s, I had been teaching other people's children how to read for over 15 years, and I could not have told you what my own household's net worth was. I didn't have a password to any of our investment accounts. I didn't know the name of our financial advisor. When I asked, my husband would answer in a way that technically provided information, while communicating clearly that my asking was an inconvenience. I stopped asking. The Greek continued. Every family gathering, every phone call with his mother that I happened to be near, every visit from his cousins who came through Denver on business or vacation. Greek flowed around me, and I floated in the middle of it like a woman who had long ago accepted that she would never reach the shore. Until the year I turned 54. My closest friend had recently retired from teaching and taken up Italian because, as she said, she had always wanted to go to Rome and order food without pointing at a menu. She started using one of those language apps on her phone, the kind that turns learning into a game, and she talked about it constantly, how satisfying it was, how her brain felt sharper, how strange and wonderful it was to suddenly understand sounds that had always been noise. I downloaded the same app. Not to learn Italian. I told myself it was just to keep my mind active. I was 54, still teaching, aware of what the research said about cognitive health and keeping the brain engaged. I chose Greek. I told myself it was practical. My husband's family was Greek. Surely it would be useful. I did not tell my husband. This is the part where people always ask why. Why the secrecy? I have turned that question over many times, and I think the honest answer is this. I kept it secret because some part of me already knew that what I was going to hear, once I could hear it, was not going to be something I was meant to hear. And some other part of me, a part that had been very quiet for a very long time, needed to know. I studied for nearly 2 years before I felt confident. The app, then workbooks, then a weekly online class with a patient instructor named Eleni, who lived in Thessaloniki and thought I was learning Greek to impress my husband's family. They will be so pleased, she told me. I smiled and said I hoped so. The first time I understood a full conversation in Greek, I was sitting in my own living room. My husband was on the phone with his younger brother, walking around the kitchen, and I was grading papers at the dining room table with the television on low. They spoke for about 20 minutes. My husband complained about traffic, discussed a property deal, mentioned that he was thinking about taking a trip to Greece the following spring. He said he was thinking of going alone. He said in Greek that he needed time to think. I kept my eyes on my papers. My pen did not stop moving, but something in my chest tightened like a fist closing slowly. I did not say anything that night, or the next week, or the month after. I had been practicing silence for 30 years. I was very good at it, but I was also watching now, and listening. And the world I had been living in was reorganizing itself around me into a shape I was only beginning to recognize. Over the following months I understood, piece by piece, the way you assemble a puzzle, not knowing what the picture will be until you are already most of the way through. My husband had been moving money. Not all at once. Slowly, the way you move furniture when you want to rearrange a room without the other person noticing until it's done. Phone calls with his brother about accounts. Conversations with his cousin who worked in finance. Once, a call with someone I didn't know, in Greek, in which my husband used a word that means something close to transition. He used it the way you would use it about a plan, not a moment. His mother called one Tuesday afternoon while I was home sick from school. My husband didn't know I was home. I had come back for a forgotten medication and was in the bedroom when she called him on his cell. He answered in the kitchen. In Greek. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I listened. She asked if he had spoken with the attorney yet. He said he was waiting for the right time. She asked how long he planned to wait. He said he needed things to be settled first. She asked about me. She used a phrase that roughly translates to, that woman, and he said that I had no idea, that I had never paid attention to anything important, that this would be easier than she thought. His mother said something then that I want to be very careful about translating because language is imperfect and I want to be precise. She said, as closely as I could understand it, that it was too bad he had wasted so many years, but that it wasn't too late to start the right life. The right life. I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time after they hung up. The house was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the street, and then it stopped, and there was nothing. I want to tell you that I cried. I think people expect that. But what I actually felt in those first minutes was something closer to recognition, not shock, recognition. The particular feeling of seeing clearly something you have been almost seeing for a very long time. I did not confront him that day. I want to be clear about this because people always ask why I didn't confront him immediately, and the answer is important, because I had spent 30 years learning that confrontation without preparation is just noise. I had watched my husband handle confrontation his whole life. He was skilled at it. He would deny, reframe, make me feel I had misunderstood. He would speak calmly, and I would begin to doubt the floor under my own feet. I had been through that enough times to know I would not do it to myself again. I needed to be prepared first. The next morning, after my husband left for work, I called the school and arranged a substitute. Then I drove to a branch of a bank across town from the one where we kept our joint accounts. I opened a checking account and a savings account in my name only. The woman who helped me was maybe 35, and she was brisk and professional, and she did not ask me any questions I didn't want to answer. I deposited $200 from the grocery cash I had accumulated in small amounts over the past several months, a habit I had quietly begun without fully knowing why. The next week I called a family law attorney whose name I found through a friend. Not my closest friend, who would have been upset and vocal and would have wanted to come with me. A different friend, quieter, who had been through a divorce 10 years earlier and who simply said, when I told her I needed a name, "I'll send it to you in the next 5 minutes." The attorney's name was Catherine. She was 58 years old, sharp and unhurried, with an office full of plants and a way of listening that made you feel your words were being held carefully. I told her what I knew. I told her about the phone calls, the accounts I had no access to, the 35 years of a financial life I had been kept out of. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me questions, practical ones, about assets and income and property, and she told me what we needed to find out and how to find it. "You're not starting from nothing," she told me. 35 years is not nothing. Legally, you have standing. What we need to do is document. I went home, and I continued being the woman my husband believed I was. I made dinner. I asked about his day. On Sunday mornings, I still made the same breakfast I had made for 30 years, eggs and toast and coffee in the blue pot. I smiled when I was supposed to smile, but I was also paying attention in a different way now. Quiet attention with a purpose. The family reunion was planned for the last weekend in September. My husband's parents had moved to Denver 6 years earlier, after my father-in-law's health declined, and we hosted a large gathering every fall. His siblings, cousins, nieces and nephews who drove or flew in from Chicago, from Phoenix, from Portland. 40, sometimes 50 people in the house and the backyard, with food covering every surface and children running through the hallways and Greek filling every room like music. I had attended these gatherings for over 3 decades. I had cooked for them and cleaned up after them and stood on the edges of conversations I could not follow, smiling at appropriate intervals, contributing what I could in English to people who switched to English for my benefit and then switched back the moment they forgot I was there. This time was different. I moved through the gathering the same way I always had, offering food, refreshing drinks, making small talk in English with the family members who sought it out. But now I could hear. Not everything, not perfectly Greek in a crowded room, moves fast, and the regional variations in the family were real, but enough to follow the current beneath the surface. My mother-in-law held court in the corner of the living room the way she always did, seated in the armchair that was understood to be hers at every gathering, surrounded by her daughters-in-law and the older cousins. She was 81 now, smaller than she had once been but no less commanding. She had never liked me. I had known that for 35 years and made my peace with it. What I had not known, until the year before, was the specific content of her dislike. Late in the afternoon, when the children had tired themselves into relative quiet and several of the older men had drifted to the backyard with drinks, I found myself in the kitchen doing dishes. The kitchen shared a wall with the hallway that led to the small den, and sound traveled. My mother-in-law and my husband's brother were in that hallway. Their voices were low, not quite private but not expecting to be overheard, the way people sound when they think the nearby person cannot understand them. My hands stayed in the water. I did not move. My husband's brother said my husband seemed nervous. My mother-in-law said he should be nervous. He had waited too long already. She said something about papers, that the papers needed to be signed before the end of the year. She said that her son had spent the best years of his life in a house without children, without real partnership. She used a Greek word that implies something more specific, a word that carries the sense of a woman who contributes to a family's future, and that it wasn't too late for him to have what he had always deserved. She said my name once, just once, in a tone that carried 40 years of verdict in it. And then she said something that I have turned over many times since, trying to decide how to feel about it. She said she didn't blame me, not entirely, that some women simply weren't meant for certain lives. She said this with a kind of finality that told me it was a conclusion she had reached long ago and had never seen any reason to revisit. I finished the dishes. I dried my hands on the dish towel that had been hanging from the oven handle for as long as I could remember, the one with the faded yellow stripes that I had bought at a street market in the first year of our marriage. I folded it carefully and hung it back. Then I walked out to the backyard and I got a glass of lemonade and I stood in the late September light and I thought, I know now. I know all of it, and knowing is enough to move. I did not tell my husband what I knew for another 6 weeks. Catherine had advised me on timing, and I trusted her. In those 6 weeks, I gathered what documentation I could, photographs of statements I found in files I had never been told not to look at, notes from my own records, information that Catherine helped me understand had legal relevance. I continued moving small amounts into my personal account each week. Not enough to be noticed, enough to matter. My teaching pension, I learned, was more significant than I had appreciated. 31 years in the Denver public school system, contributing through every paycheck, meant that I was not as financially helpless as I had been trained to feel. Catherine said this twice, with deliberate emphasis, because she understood that some things need to be said out loud before a woman who has been kept from her own financial life will believe them. You are not starting over, she said. You are continuing. With a better map. On a Thursday evening in early November, after dinner, I sat down across from my husband at the kitchen table. He was on his phone, scrolling. I waited until he looked up. I told him I thought we should speak with an attorney about separating our finances and, eventually, our lives. He went very still. Then he asked what I was talking about. I told him I had a sense that we both knew the marriage had not been what either of us needed for some time, and that I thought the kindest and most honest thing we could do was to end it properly, with legal counsel, and move forward. He asked me where this was coming from. I looked at him across that table, the same table where we had eaten 30 years of dinners, where I had helped him prepare for business presentations, and he had helped me cut construction paper for classroom projects in the early years, before he stopped being interested in the details of my life. I looked at him, and I thought about all the Greek I had listened to over the past 2 years, all the conversations I had been present for without being acknowledged, and I felt something settle in me like a stone finding the bottom of still water. I told him it was coming from somewhere I should have listened to a long time ago. He tried, over the following weeks, to reframe what was happening as something other than what it was. He suggested counseling. He suggested we needed a vacation. He suggested I was stressed from work and not thinking clearly. He did not know about Catherine. He did not know about my account at the other bank. He did not know that I had already spoken with our mortgage lender and understood exactly what our property was worth and what I was entitled to under Colorado law. He did not know, most importantly, that for 2 years I had been sitting in the same rooms with him, understanding every word. I want to say something about that, about the years of not understanding, or pretending not to. People ask if I feel angry. Yes, but the anger is clean, which surprises me. It isn't the sour, corroded anger of someone who was deceived for decades. It's something sharper and newer, the anger of a woman who finally has accurate information and knows what to do with it. The divorce was final 11 months after that Thursday dinner. Catherine was right that the process would be uncomfortable, and right that I had more legal standing than I had ever understood. The house was sold. The assets were divided according to Colorado law, which my husband had apparently not fully consulted before making plans that depended on me knowing nothing. I received half. I also received my pension, untouched. I am 64 years old now. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I chose because of the coffee shop on the corner and the library 3 blocks away, and the fact that no one there has any expectations of me. I went back to teaching after a brief leave, and I have 2 more years before I retire on my own terms. On a date I chose, with a financial plan Catherine helped me put together and that I understand completely and review myself every quarter. My closest friend, the one who started all of this by downloading a language app, came over for dinner last spring and asked me if I thought about what my life would have looked like if I had never learned Greek. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the armchair in the living room corner and the kitchen with the yellow dish towel, and all the rooms I had moved through for 35 years, understanding half of what was being said and none of what was being meant. I told her I used to think the problem was the language barrier, that if only I had understood, I could have responded, defended myself, been a real participant in my own life. But I've come to understand that the language was never really the problem. The problem was that I had spent 35 years waiting for permission to take up space, financial space, emotional space. The kind of space that comes from knowing your own name is on the accounts and the documents and the decisions that shape your life. The Greek I learned didn't give me power. It gave me information. The power was always mine. I had simply been persuaded, very gradually, over a very long time, to leave it unclaimed. My mother-in-law died 2 years ago. I did not attend the service. I sent a card to the family because I am who I am, and it felt like the right thing to do. I wrote that she had been a significant presence in my life and that I hoped she had found peace. Both of those things are true, and the second one I meant. I think about her sometimes not with anger but with something more complicated, a recognition that she was also a woman shaped by forces larger than herself, who passed along to her son the belief that marriage was a transaction in which one person's life was the investment and another's was the return. She believed this completely, I think. It was the only map she had ever been given. I have a different map now. It is detailed and accurate, and I made it myself. I still use the language app. Not Greek anymore. I started Portuguese last year, just to see. My instructor is a young woman in Lisbon who finds it charming that a 64-year-old retired teacher in progress from Denver wants to learn her language for no reason except that she can. She doesn't know the full story. She doesn't need to. What she knows is that I show up every week, that I ask questions, that I am willing to sound foolish in the service of eventually being understood. I think that is enough. I think, at this point in my life, that is everything. If you are sitting somewhere reading this or listening to this and you recognize something in what I have described, not necessarily the language, not necessarily the Greek or the family gatherings or the yellow dish towel, but the feeling of moving through a life in which the important conversations are happening in a room you have somehow never been invited into, I want you to hear what took me 35 years to understand. You don't have to learn the language to deserve a seat at the table, but it helps to stop pretending you don't notice the conversation. The door was never locked. I just kept waiting for someone to tell me I was allowed to open it.